Hey guys, in this video we're going to explore the concept of flow, visual flow within a composition. So flow, what is it? Well, a layout either has it or it doesn't. Effective compositions have the ability to carry a viewer's eye effortlessly through an image or layout. This is what's called visual flow. There are obvious directional elements, such as arrows or sequence of images, strong use of perspective, etc., that can be incorporated to persuade the eye to move along a certain path. Other means of influencing the eye's exploration can be more subtle: a tapering line, a distribution of elements of interest that beckon more investigation. Flow can also be interrupted to call attention to a shift in content or message that deserves special notice. Certain elements within a layout tend to direct the eye's attention. Naturally, it's preferable, in most cases, to keep the viewer's interest inside a layout rather than sending it off the edge. In these next examples of flow, we'll pay close attention to where the eye wants to go within a composition based on where the visual elements are placed and how they are aligned in relationship to one another. Certain elements within this business card example tend to direct the eye's attention. It's preferable to, in most cases, keep the viewer's eye within the composition rather than sending it off the page. And I think this example does a pretty good job of that. Beginning with this wave motif at the top of the artboard, it brings your eye into the composition from the top left of the artboard and sweeps in, curves back around, points towards the logo, the phone number, and then brings your eye down here at the bottom to the type elements. Another kind of flow, as much conceptual as visual, involves the way that format conventions are carried between related pieces. The stationary items, though containing a number of visual variations in their presentations, share common cues such as using the same palette and a consistent use of the wave motif across all of the business stationery components. Here's another good example of business stationery components that display a strong sense of visual flow through repetition of shape, color, and type style. So I really like the way these little pen or pencil icons function as arrows to direct your attention inside the letterhead component. I think that's really nice, and keeps your attention kind of moving in this circular pattern. So that's really nice, and I like the way that this shape is repeated across artboards, as well as just the triangular shape in general. And the color scheme also, so adding that element of harmony along with flow, they really work hand in hand to kind of support each other. And you have a nice sense of overall visual hierarchy as well, from one artboard to the next. So you see, the person's name immediately when you look at any of these components. And then your eye automatically begins to track the rest of the informative elements in the order that they're supposed to be viewed and appreciated. In this example, the image seems incongruent with the message being communicated. The right to left orientation of the picture contradicts the natural movement of the text. So I wanted to show you some examples of how we could improve a sense of flow in this example. And if you want to kind of test these out for yourself, this file is available for you in Blackboard in the resource files for demonstration folder. One obvious way to better help the sense of flow in this composition would be to simply just flip the image so that we have the image message working congruently with the way that we read the text elements. So I have a worked ahead group of images that I'll just turn on. And you can see now that we have where the eye enters into the composition window from the left and moves towards the center, where we see the lettering has now been scaled down to look as though it's fitting within the bottle. I also rasterized my type layer and then just simply erased the letter forms that were overlapping the thumb and the fingers to make it look as though the type is actually a part of the photograph. And so just by doing those two simple things, we've aligned the image with the message and increased a sense of visual flow. But we can do a few other things too to make this a little more interesting. We could literally have the type look as though it's flowing with the liquid that's being poured from the pitcher into the cup. And so in this example, remember the type has been rasterized, so I can select these letter forms and I can rotate them and place them however I need to. And I also added drop shadows behind these letter forms so that they would contrast from the background and make them easier to read. And then in this last example, I separated the drop shadows from their original type image layers and applied motion blurs to those. And so that really puts those letter forms into motion, increasing the overall sense of visual flow. This example struggles with the same problems. So we have a scooter that's facing the wrong direction, and it's incongruent with the message Scooter Speedway Adventure Park. In Western language, we have learned to read from left to right, and it's probably for this reason that we are strongly influenced to perceive visual directions from left to right being as forward or as fast and backward as slow. So keep this in mind when designing artwork that depicts concepts like speed and direction. So if you notice the type for Scooter Speedway, it's italicized, which puts it leaning in a right direction, which puts it in a forward motion kind of direction. But we have the scooter going in the opposite direction, so we have this incongruency. So this could be easily fixed by, you probably guessed it, flipping the scooter around. So again, I created a duplicate layer of the scooter, applied a motion blur to it, and just offset that motion blur a bit more. And so now we have a message that aligns more with the headline, Scooter Speedway. And then in this last example, I just moved the scooter over and exaggerated that motion blur to stretch across more of the artboard. And so now we have a message that seems more in alignment, and it definitely has a better sense of flow, overall flow. For the next part of this demonstration, I want to talk about the concept of flow from the outside in. So in this part of the demonstration, we're going to be using Adobe InDesign. And you can see this document in front of me. It's just a made-up magazine for Arkansas Fall Beauty Seeker's Guide. And so in this example, we have a nice photograph for the cover page, a nice headline type for the top, and a little description subheader beneath that. And then inside of the magazine, we have some columns of type, some pretty background images, and some type elements that reflect what's going on with the type on the front, as well as some repeated elements like these little leaf elements that actually are inspired from the leaf element that's used in the letter K for Arkansas. So a smooth visual and thematic flow between the cover of a piece and its interior requires some kind of visible connection between the two. So creating a connection of this kind is important when it comes to establishing a sense of forethought, cohesion, and professionalism in a design. And some means of linking the cover of a piece with its interior are things like consistent use of typography. So you can see here the type style doesn't change much from cover to interior. things like consistent use of margins. So even though you don't see the margins the way I have this presented right now, if I put this view into normal view, you can see that this is a two-column setup on the interior pages. There's a half-inch margin that all of the visual elements stay aligned within, and that's also true for the front cover. So even though I have a photograph that stretches across beyond the margins, the type elements are nicely aligned inside of these margins. So again, use of margins and or a grid system, and then repeating the same image on the cover and interior of a piece, or using images that are obviously related by theme. As you can see here, I have fall foliage on the front, and then I have images of places in Arkansas with pretty fall foliage scenes. And then there are also repeated graphic design elements, such as these floral elements, just these simple line elements that help to create divisions between the paragraph type and the headline type. So to get started, if you want to follow along in today's demonstration or this demonstration video, you can find the resource files for this in Blackboard, and you'll really just find 3 image files. So the image file for the cover image, and then the 2 interior images. And then we'll just start a brand new Adobe InDesign document for this part of the demonstration. Alright, so to get started, you'll go to File, New Document. And we're going to set this up as a 3-page document. And I'm going to set mine up for 2 columns. You can experiment with 3 if you'd like. And for the column gutter, let's see, I'm going to set this to inches. So that's 8.5 by 11. So I'm going to set mine to 0.16 inches. And margins of a 1/2 inch. And everything else looks okay, so I'll just hit create. And here is my 3-page document. So let's go ahead and load the cover page photo. So you can go to File, Place. And sorry, these are screenshots, so they don't have any like real names. So I'm going to grab the screenshot that looks like this and hit open. So my cursor is loaded with this photograph. And I'm just going to click and drag a large box, big enough to cover this window. And I'm going to work on playing around with the scale of the photograph and also adjust the object window to see how it looks cropped in at an 8.5 by 11 size. So remember, when you're working in Adobe InDesign, every visual element that you work with is considered an object. And so what that means is no matter if it's type or a graphic design element or a photograph, anything that you are working with that's selectable in this program is wrapped inside of what's called an object frame. And then within that frame is the content frame. And so it takes some getting used to. You really kind of have to practice making selections in this program and understanding the difference between whether you're selecting the content within that frame or the object frame. So if I want to scale this image down, I'm going to double click on this radial button, content grabber, that illuminates whenever you hover over it with your mouse or your cursor, and you'll be able to see the bounding box of the actual content inside of the object frame. Now if I deselect and then select the object again, what it's selected by right now is the entire object and its frame. So if I pick it up and move it, the object frame moves with the content inside the object frame. But also, if I just interact with the object frame, that's where I can get that cropping to occur. So if I extend the object frame outside of the parameters of the content, and then select the content within the frame, I'm trying to get this in the right view so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. So I can move the content inside of the object frame, and you can see as I move the content inside the object frame, you can kind of see the orange outline of the content frame moving inside of the object frame box. So you're really dealing with two different kind of selection windows. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to practice scaling this image. I'm going to hold Option and Shift and drag the scaling corners of the content inside of the object frame. And that's going to allow me to scale this object and keep the proportions constrained. So it's very important when you're scaling objects in this program and in Adobe Illustrator to make sure that you keep your proportions constrained as you scale. So I like the way that's kind of centered in there. And then just to take care of all of this overhang, I'm going to deselect and then reselect the object frame. And just scale the sides in so that my image is cropped. Alright, and that looks pretty good for right now. So what I'll do is just lock this layer, and I'm going to create a new layer for my type. And then with the type tool, remember with the type tool you don't just click and start typing because nothing will happen. You have to actually create a type frame for the type. So with the type tool, I'm going to line it up in the upper left corner of the inside margin and just click and drag a rectangle that stretches to the margin on the right of the document. And then I'll type the word Arkansas, and I'll make it much, much larger. And the font style that I'm using is Minion Pro. And I just want to make sure that my type stretches from one margin's edge to the other. Okay, so now what's happened is I've got a little bit of overset type, but if I just extend this type window out a little bit of its object frame, then I can reveal the type that was overset beyond the edge of that type frame. So obviously we need a different color for our type because the black doesn't stand out too great. So I'm going to sample a color from this background image. So before I start sampling, I'm going to deselect my type. And I'd actually like to not only sample this color for the type, but I'm going to save this color as a swatch color. So I'm going to use my eyedropper tool, and I'm just going to click inside of this pretty sunset area. And I like this real, yellow, orangey kind of color. And so I'm going to add that to my swatches library. And so in order to add that, so that we can reuse that same color again later on in our layout and create that nice sense of harmony and also help support that sense of flow, I'm going to control click on this fill color, and there will be the option to add to swatches. And now that it's added to swatches, I can add this color to different shapes that I create later on in this document, as well as type. So I'm going to go back and select my type with the type tool. Just double click, and in the type color options, I'll click the drop down menu, and you'll see these preset colors at the very top of your list. But if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see the swatch that we just added. So I'll select that color, and then there it is. Now, my object frame is still pretty large, so I want to make sure that this fits snugly around the type, because we're going to create some more type that's going to fit right underneath here. And so we're going to have trouble fitting those pieces close together if those object frames overlap. So one way that you can do that is you can always check this little button here for fit frame to content, and that often does the trick. Or you can always just grab the object frame and scale it up. Now we're ready for the type that's going to go just below the headline type. So again, you're going to get the type tool, and you'll create a type object frame. And then let's go ahead and set our font size, or our point size, to a pretty large size, just so that we can see it easier. And so we're going to type 2025 fall. Alright, so I can see we've got some overset type, not a problem. I'll just increase that object frame so I can select all the type and just take the point size down a little bit. And then we want to give this a color that contrasts well from the background. And I just went with white, but you can experiment with different colors if you'd like. White seemed like a pretty easy choice for this area because the range is kind of all over the place with the colors in the background. Maybe that could use a little bit of a drop shadow. So it's a little more offset than I'd like for it to be, but that drop shadow does really help pop that that type into the foreground and create more contrast. I might come back and revisit how to fine-tune the distance, but for right now, I'll leave it like that. Alright, so now let's create that little leaf element that's going to just fit right over the top part of this K. And by doing this, it kind of spices up the cover page a little bit, adds a fun little graphic design element, but it also gives us something else that we can work with to create this sense of flow and unity on the interior pages. So I'm going to do a little bit of drawing in this program. I'll create a brand new layer. And actually, I'm going to put this on a layer that's called Lines and Art. Okay, so I'm going to use the pen tool to create this little leaf element, and I'm just going to draw it in place. So I'm going to click and drag to create an anchor point and a curved anchor point, so you can see the directional handles that shoot off of that. And then I'll just come right up kind of at a diagonal, create another anchor point with directional handles, and then I'll just close that path at the very bottom. So now I have this kind of funky looking oval, but I'm going to use the direct selection tool, and I'm going to hold the Option key down to lock the directional handle on the other side of the anchor point down. That way I don't get that seesaw effect. And I'm just going to lift this path and start to shape the top part of my leaf. And I'll do the same thing with this anchor point up here. I think I'll start with this directional handle, hold the Option key down, and then click and drag. And there we have our little leaf shape. And then I'd like for it to be a different color from the rest of the lettering. So again, I will sample another color from my color palette, the background image. I'll use my eyedropper tool to do that. And that's a nice color. I think I'll add that to my swatches library, but I think I'll end up with something a little bit lighter than that. But I know I might use this later, so Control click and add to swatches. Now I'll sample another color. Looks pretty close. All right. All right, so now I'm ready to start working on the interior pages. So on these two examples that I have, they're very similar, but the treatments for the background of Pinnacle Mountain are a little bit different. So I want to show you two different approaches for incorporating an image like this that stretches across two pages, and also have the text wrap around the object frame for this image. In this other example, I just simply left more of the sky element in this image, just to kind of spice up the overall layout and just the overall look of it. So I want to show you two different ways that you can edit this image in Photoshop and then bring it into Adobe InDesign. So let's go to Photoshop. And I'm going to start with opening the JPEG image of the Pinnacle Mountain scene. So I'll just go to File, Open. And there we have our kind of panoramic view. I'm going to unlock this layer. And I'm going to use the eraser tool. to start to erase part of this background. And so I'm going to start with a really large brush. So the idea is that I'm going to start with a really large brush size and 0 hardness. And I'm also going to begin with the opacity, maybe set to 100. But halfway through this process, I'm going to lower the opacity to 50% and end up only erasing 50% of the pixels with a feathered brush. And that's going to give us a really soft kind of gradation of the sky image into the background or the backdrop behind the type elements. So I'm going to start just erasing the outer edges. And now I'm going to lower my brush size a little bit. So maybe something around 200. I'm still going to keep the hardness at 0. But this time, I'm going to lower the erasure opacity by about 50%. And then I'll come back and begin the erasing process around the edges of the sky portion of this image. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save this as a TIFF, and that will retain the transparency. So when we bring this over into InDesign, it should blend with the white background. So I'll go to File, Save As. And choose TIFF. And now I'll hop over to my blank InDesign document, and I'll place the image. Now, in this example here, you can see, and actually in both examples, you can see that my columns of type, they extend all the way down and cut off in, kind of an organic shape, close to where the sky meets the land in the background image. And so in order for that to happen, the text has to be able to interact with another object frame of some kind. For it to wrap around. It needs to sense that there's an object frame for it to wrap around. Now, in this example, I, in Photoshop, actually erased more of the sky around Pinnacle Mountain and the tree line. And so then I was able to edit this image's object frame to fit the contour edge of the peak of the mountain and the forest line. But for this image, if I were to edit the object frame for this image, it would have ended up with a very stark edge cutoff for the sky. And it would have looked like we just cut it out with scissors and glued it in there. And so what I did for this example was create a separate object frame, or basically just a blank object frame that was roughly the shape of the outer edge of the mountain and the tree line. So I'm going to show you how to do that with this image here. So I'm going to add a couple of anchor points to this object path. So you can edit an object path just like any other vector path. I'm going to zoom in and use the pen tool and just add a couple of anchor points. And then I'll switch tools, and I'll go to my direct selection tool, and I'll just isolate one anchor point. I have a hard time seeing these sometimes. So I'm moving the object path. I have appears to be 2 anchor points selected somehow. You can see as I drag it and when I release it, when I reshape it, this is the kind of edge that I would get if I tried to just edit this image's object path. So I don't want to do that, so I'm going to undo this. And I'm going to lock this image down so I don't accidentally select it or do something to it. And now I'm going to create a new path that's kind of follows the outline of Pinnacle Mountain. It looks like I've gotten my picture a little out of scale. So let me fix that. Okay, that's better. Alright, so now I'm ready to make my path. I'm going to use the pen tool. And I'm just going to start right here. Click and drag. Click and drag. And notice I'm just kind of, and my fill is on. Actually I don't need a fill or a stroke. So I'll turn that off. And then I'll continue with my path. And now I've closed the path. And so now, after we create some type and place it in these columns, we will have the type wrap around this path. So let's create some type. First, let's create our headlines. So I'll create a text block here, or text frame. And my headline will read, "Take a hike." And then we'll increase that type size. And this too will be in Minion Pro to be consistent with the type on the front cover. So make sure that you make that object frame really tight around all of your elements. And then we'll create a little bit of type. For the author. By Catherine Spear. And let's make that the same color as the headline type. And let's make it bold. And we'll just leave that there for right now. We're going to come back and kind of, fine-tune all of our type elements once we get everything kind of created. Now let's create some type for our columns. So I'll get the type tool. And I will create a type frame. And then I'll just fill it with some placeholder type. And then I'll just go to the next column and do the same thing again. And you can see that my type, when I create the placeholder type and fill those columns, it automatically wraps around this object that I created, this transparent object. Alright, so now let's go ahead and create our second piece of headline type. And we're going to do it at the top of this third column. So I'm just going to move this type down. And I don't care that it's overset because it's just placeholder type. We're just going for a look. Alright, so that might be enough room. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste this take a hike. And then just change the wording. So let's see, what was it? Best Arkansas Fall Road Trip. Maybe it's best fall. Let's do that. Best fall. Now I can't see my type because it's overset at the moment, so let's see what we have here. Good Lord. Not even close. Alright, so I think I want to emphasize best fall, and we might have to do this as two separate type frames, but let's just see what we get. So I'm going to increase the size of this. And then let's decrease the size of this and see what we get. Not bad. I think these two lines need to be closer together. So let's see if we can adjust that. So I'm going to select the type frame and then select the type tool so that I get the appropriate options for the type. There we go. For some reason, I can't get that to work right now. So, my workaround would be to select that, cut it, make this a whole separate text frame, snug the frame up around that, bring it down, and paste in Best Fall. And place it where it needs to go. Alright, not bad. Then we also need to create some text for our author, and then we're also going to have a photo added to this, and I'd like for it to stretch across the two columns and stretch across the gutter in the middle and have the text wrap around it. So we're going to give 2 credits on this page. So we're going to have another author. Who will it be this time? We can't let Catherine do it because if you can see over here, she just wrote a bunch of gibberish. Way to go, Catherine. All right, so we're gonna change this to Sarah Coons. And then we'll just copy and paste that. And the photo will be by Araya. Araya Chan. All right, and then we're going to come back and add some more little graphic design elements that help to create a sense of flow from the cover page into the interior pages. Now let's add our photo in the middle. So I'm going to start with just creating a text frame. Not a text frame, just a frame. And then with that selected, I'm just going to place an image. And as you can see, it's a pretty big picture. So I'm going to scale that down, hold Option and Shift while I scale that picture inward. All right. Oops. All right, and our next step is to get the type to wrap around this picture. So with this object selected, I'm just going to go over here to the text wrap window and choose Wrap Around Bounding Box. So now you can see the type is wrapping around the bounding box of this photograph. And so I can pull these borders in a little bit if I like and bring the type elements just a little bit closer and just frame it in. Let's look at that in preview. It's looking pretty good. Alright, so now for our little graphic design elements that we're going to add to the interior pages. And what we're going to do is we're just going to copy and paste this leaf element and bring it down here. And I want to make sure that I do this on the lines and art layer. And I'm going to duplicate this a couple of times and just assign a different shade of orange or yellow to these leaves to give it a little bit of variation. So I'm going to go back and use that yellow that we used for the type element on the cover page. And maybe this darker orange. And I'm just going to put them in some kind of a little arrangement. It's looking pretty good. And then I'm just going to select all three of these by holding the Shift key down, and then I'm going to group those together. So now they just function as one object. And I'm going to scale that down. So I'm going to hold Option and Shift. And then just create a couple line elements. I'm going to turn my my guides back on. Use those so I can make sure I'm aligning things up correctly. And using the line tool, and I think I'm going to go with this darker color for the line element. And then just duplicate that. So I'm holding the Option key down and just dragging that over and creating a second line element. And I'm going to pull a guide down from the ruler above and use that to guide this line and make sure it aligns at the same level as the other line element. And then I'm going to group these three things together. So I'm going to hold Shift and select all three of these elements. Go to Object and Group. Alright, and I think I might swap the order of my type and my graphic design elements. I'm not sure if I like that down there or not. Maybe it needs to go on top. I'm going to move this column type down just a little bit. And copy and paste our design element. And I think I would like for these lines to stretch all the way to the column edges. So what I can do is just select one anchor point of that line path on either end and just use my arrow keys to extend it. And since I changed the point size for the author on this page, I need to do the same thing, be consistent with these as well. Alright, so one thing that we have left are page numbers. So in my example files, I included page numbers, but they're really hard to see just as floating numbers. In fact, they're kind of hard to see now. But I just repeated that leaf element again on these interior pages. And my vision would be that that leaf element would appear on all of the pages throughout the entire magazine. So let's go ahead and create some page numbers with that repeating leaf element. We're going to do that on the master page. So I'm just going to select this leaf element and copy it. And then I'm going to go to my master pages, my A parent master page, and paste that leaf element. I'm going to get a lighter color and put a little bit of a drop shadow behind it. And turn the opacity down. We just need enough of a drop shadow so that, I think it's in this one, yeah, so that where the leaf elements overlap these, light green and gold colors, it won't get lost in all of that, and you'll still be able to see it pretty well. So there's one. And then we're going to go ahead and create our special character in this same location. And then we'll copy and paste it to the other opposite corner on the facing page. So you'll need to use the type tool and just create a little type frame. And I'm just going to type the letter A. And go to Type, Insert, Special Character, Markers, Current Page Number. So I guess I didn't need to type that A at all. And then if you want a period after it, you can do it there as well. And let's make this a lot larger. I'm going to place it over this leaf. See how it looks? And I'm going to change the color to white. And bold. And then I'll select both of these and hold the Option key down and just click and drag and carry your copy of it over to the opposite page. And I'm just trying to be consistent where I set that page number, so I'm just going to set that A right on the line, the guideline for the margin, and have the period butt up against the vertical line of that margin. I want to make sure that I'm doing the same thing over here. Close, but not quite. Alright, now let's check out what we have. So when you create things on master pages, those are elements that repeat in the same location on each page throughout your document. So let's check out our interior pages, and there's our little page numbers, but we also have a page number on the cover, and we really don't want that. So here's how you can override a page number in a document. And I'm fine with this being number 2 and number 3, the interior pages, but we don't need that on the cover. So in your Pages window, there is a special page where it says None. All right, and this allows you to override a master page on a specific page that you direct it to. So to make this happen, you just select this page and drag it to your cover page in your Pages window. And now it's been overridden, and you won't have to see it, or you won't see it on the cover. But your page numbers are still where they're supposed to be on the interior pages. Okay, so here we are at the final result of our exploration of flow from the outside in. So we started with a photograph on the cover page, and from this beautiful fall scene photo, we were able to create other elements that carry that theme throughout the interior pages of this document, creating this nice sense of flow. We have this background image of Pinnacle Mountain in the background that stretches across 2 pages. We have this beautiful photo taken by Araya. Great job, Araya. You outdid yourself. And we have type elements that echo the type elements from the cover, but also the colors that echo from the cover image. So we have a lot of really nice things going on here. We have these smaller little leaf elements that echo the leaf element on the cover. And I also strategically placed them so that they are pointing in what we would consider to be a forward direction. And that just even further enhances that sense of flow. So I hope you guys enjoyed this demonstration. And this next assignment, you will create a 3-page document. So a cover page for a magazine, and then interior 2 pages that show a good understanding of flow and alignment within a composition. And you may use your magazine cover that you did for the previous assignment for this assignment. So if you want to just go ahead and use that in this Adobe InDesign document, you're welcome to do that. On Monday, I can walk you through the steps of getting all of that content migrated into an InDesign document. But that would save you a lot of time, and then you wouldn't be starting from scratch. You would have something already set up and ready to work with, and elements that you can begin to pull from to create this nice sense of flow within your 2-page document. So, and again, I hope you guys enjoyed this demonstration. We'll talk more about the assignment on Monday, and have a great night.